Hello, and welcome to FirstFlight, a Star Trek Enterprise rewatch podcast where we are watching and discussing each episode of Enterprise in succession. FirstFlight is a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions Network.
This is Commander Tucker of Enterprise. We've got some information you're going to want to hear.
Welcome, Enterprise fans. I am your co-host, Melanie.
And I'm your co-host, Abby.
And tonight we are discussing Sleeping Dogs, the 13th episode of Season 1. This episode was written by Fred Decker and directed by Les Landau. It aired on January 30th, 2002. But before we begin our discussion, we need to issue a read alert.
Tactical alert. All hands to stations.
There are potential spoilers ahead. We might end up talking about any part of the series at any time. And now for a summary of the episode, it's time for Abby's Captain's Log. Okay, Abby, let's go.
Captain Starlog Supplemental.
All right, Sleeping Dogs. While exploring a gas giant, Enterprise finds the wreck of a Klingon scout vessel sinking into the atmosphere. Depaul, Reed, and Hoshi get stranded on board as Archer tries to convince a captured Klingon to help before his crewmates get crushed.
All right, it's time to deploy our Subspace Amplifiers and get into this episode. Abby, what are your thoughts on Sleeping Dogs?
Well, let's talk about that cold open, because I have to say it was really nice to see it be all Hoshi and Malcolm outside of the one voice over the comm. But it was nice to see those two characters who we haven't really seen have a ton of interaction with each other and being so comfortable with each other, because their last scene that they really had intensely together was where he thought she was hitting on him when she was just trying to figure out his favorite food. So it's nice to see they've moved past and continued to build that friendship that they have. And it was nice to see Malcolm, who is not the most relaxed guy, telling Hoshi to relax. Might be the one person on the ship less relaxed than he is. And I like to see that Hoshi is practicing her weaponry and her shooting. I like that we're seeing her get her space legs a little bit. We kind of knew this arc was coming, but it's nice to see her do the work of it, not just suddenly be fine with it.
Yeah, I agree. I really enjoyed this cold open also. And yes, that scene between them in Silent Enemy was so awkward. So it was nice to see them being friendly and moving past that. And I really liked the way Malcolm was so earnest in helping her. He seemed really concerned about guiding her and assisting her and showing her what was going on with this new weapon she's using. And that whole scene was really super cool. I enjoyed that as well. And again, like you said, nice to see Hoshi branching out and keeping sharp on all the different areas of things that she's going to be doing. So that was really cool.
Well, and it's, again, one of those moments where you see Malcolm Reed is good at his job. Mm-hmm. And I have never had more of an appreciation for that than I have since we've been doing this, to see, he is taking the time, and not just because she's his friend, but that if anyone came up and said, hey, I'm having trouble with this new weapon, I can't get it quite right, he's taking the time and he's teaching, not just blowing stuff up. And that's so nice to see. It's nice to see that everyone who ends up in this away team really has their moments to shine. And this episode really highlights them. And that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, I'm with you on all of that. And I know we've talked before about we generally see Malcolm in a professional position. And yes, him helping Hoshi is professional, but there is that friendship vibe going on as well. And I like to see Malcolm just be Malcolm Reed, the person.
Yeah.
So there was a lot in this cold open that was so interesting. I really enjoyed it. And at the beginning of this episode, when they first discover the gas giant, and we have Travis doing the boomer callback, which is always great to get those little tidbits.
Yep.
And we see once again how caring Archer is. He, knows that there's biosigns down there. He wants to help the people. And even though his people could be potentially in a dangerous situation, he gives that 20-minute window of safety because he wants them to do everything they can possibly do. And of course, later on, he makes that joke about helping people. But right now, I thought that was neat that Archer just wanted to push the time limit as far as he possibly could to help the other people and make sure his own people were safe.
Well, I think it's so very human of him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and we even saw that in Dear Doctor when Phlox was commenting on how empathetic and compassionate that humans are, and Archer talking about how his compassion guides his judgment. So I think there's a lot of that coming into play here, as well as the scientific curiosity. And that's nice to see. But I have to say, one of the things that cracked me up about this was they got 20 minutes. Could there be more of a Trek trope than, you have 20 minutes to do something impossible that should take you, hours or days? And somehow it always manages to be okay. So, I mean, and none of the people who go on this away team are the engineers that usually make those miracles happen. So that was just made me chuckle in the back of my head. The little inside joke there from the writers for all of us who, obsess over those kind of things.
Yes. Good point. I didn't think of that.
I also wanted to talk about this away team and the dynamics between the three that go, because it's an interesting trio that we don't really see together very often. And I like that it was Depaul who asked for Hoshi. And I also like that in this episode, you saw so many shifts in the dynamic between them. It was respectful. It was at times adversarial. It was at times calming. It was at times aggravating. I mean, they really went through a whole gauntlet of emotions between it. Well, at least we had Hoshi with the emotions, but they had a lot of different facets of that relationship. And I really wish that relationship had developed more from this point. And I wish we had seen more of Hoshi and Malcolm and Depaul and Malcolm. And I completely understand that when you only have 26 episodes in a season, and you have, 7 main cast members, that not everybody is going to get time with every other character in a very deep, long, meaningful way all the time. But it was really nice to see this episode focus on that trio and all the little bits of character development that we got because of them being with people who they're not normally with.
Most definitely. I completely agree with you. I've always had a soft spot for this episode. I really enjoy it. And I think the strength of this episode, or one of the big strengths, is this trio, the dynamics of this trio that, like you said, we don't often see together. I really enjoyed seeing the three of them together, and they had to listen to each other, problem solve together, work together, figure things out. And they are listening to each other, especially at the end when Hoshi is making suggestions there and they're kind of looking at her like, and then respecting what she's saying. I loved seeing the three of them together. And like you, I do wish there had been more of that in Enterprise. And might I also say, when they go off together in the shuttle pod, I am a huge fan of these environmental suits, Abby.
Yeah.
And for some reason, they're just really prominently displayed in this episode where you can actually see the Enterprise patch on the front of them.
Yes.
And then, later they have to take them off. And I love that costume. And it was really nice to see them in this episode highlighted like that.
Yeah, anyone who's listened to me talk about Star Trek for any length of time knows that I really appreciate the costuming on this series, and I appreciate the costuming in Star Trek overall. It is detail-oriented, it is beautifully done, and it looks functional, which I really appreciate. Like, that could really be an environmental suit. And the color is just really neat, especially when they go on the Klingon ship, and it kind of helps them pop a little bit from all the dark lighting and the moodiness. They've got just that little bit of sheen, and they look clean in that grubby, messy, smelly, stinky ship. So it was just an interesting way to compare the two.
Definitely. Abby, in the last episode, you called out the lighting people. I want to call out the sound people in this one. I don't know if it's called Foley designer, whatever the proper term is, but when they get to the Klingon ship and Malcolm pops his helmet off, that sound as he takes it off is just perfect. It really sounds like he's disconnecting the helmet. And can we talk about Depaul's facial expression for a moment here? What did you think?
It could be the most emotional that we have seen Depaul thus far in the entire series. Just that brief second of repulsion, and she's rearing back from the air coming into her helmet. That was almost my Porthos pick because it was such a Vulcan move, but you just felt it viscerally. It must really stink in that ship. And she doesn't have her nasal numbing agent right now. So, yeah.
I was really surprised to see her make that face. But I guess, like you said, it just hit her. She's a person and she had a reaction, but I thought that was funny. And then she had that quasi joke of maybe we should just keep our helmets on. I thought that was a great moment.
Mm-hmm.
Abby, the set design on this Klingon ship is incredible. Not just the galley, the food galley, which I know we'll talk about that scene, but which was an incredible set. The whole thing, it was very believable. And I thought super well done.
Yeah, I think the detail that they put into it was really impressive. And we have seen some Klingon ships of this era, but like Depaul said, we haven't seen them all. So they really made it look Klingon, yet made it look different than the other Klingon things we've seen. And I think it was interesting that, until Hoshi read the Klingon on the wall, it wasn't so obviously a Klingon ship. And it kind of makes me wonder, not every human is on a Federation vessel. So probably not every Klingon is on one of their military vessels. They've got to have garbage scows and all those other things too. So I wonder more about the different types of Klingon ships and if they all smell like this, because then, diplomacy might be tricky.
That's a really good point. There must be many classes of Klingon ships that we don't know about. And it's nice to see this little look into this Raptor class, one that they're showing us. And even though we do know, we as the viewers do come into this with knowledge of Klingon lore, I do like hearing it and getting the gaps filled in when Depaul is explaining to Hoshi and Malcolm that the Klingons don't have escape pods and they don't use distress signals, and that if they wake up, they will kill us. Like, we know most of that stuff, but it was interesting to hear it laid out like that because I just find it so fascinating. And I personally feel that the actress who played the Klingon Buka, Michelle Bonilla, was fantastic. I really liked her. I thought she was believable as a Klingon. I liked the writing that they gave her, especially when Archer was convincing her after he brushed up on his Klingon when she said, the triumph was shared by all. And when our ships get here, they will destroy you. I mean, it all made sense. And I thought she pulled it off really well.
Yeah, I think she was a really interesting look at a Klingon again, too, because it's almost like they're not lower decks, but is medium decks a thing? She's not their command structure. She's not the lowest of the low. She's got them there. So she knows enough about the ship and what's going on to try to help and escape and to find them and attack them. But she isn't the captain. And it's interesting to see Archer interacting with her, knowing that he's the superior officer on either side, but that she still is going to be a Klingon right back to him. And that scene where they argue, she's so Klingon. And I think Archer actually felt pretty good about being able to have some of that aggression and hostility come out. And it was interesting to see when he interacted with her and then later on with the Klingon captain, just to kind of see him let loose. And maybe it was a nice change for him as opposed to having to be super polite all the time and open and willing for everything. He could kind of say what his first instinct was.
Yeah, I agree. Since we're talking about Klingons, I'll just talk about that end scene, but I know we'll go back to other stuff. I really loved that end scene with him and I believe it was Vaughn Armstrong playing the Klingon captain.
Mm-hmm.
That Archer has learned. He's learned how to best interact with the Klingons. When he says, you won't last 10 seconds with us in a fight and I'll blast you back from where we found you.
Yeah.
Archer's learning. And it was effective. It was exactly what he needed to say. I also liked that they kept it consistent, that the very first thing the Klingons did after they were saved, and I'm not saying all Klingons are like this, I don't mean to make a blanket generalization, but I did find it interesting that after they were saved by the NX-01, that their first instinct was to attack. So, and then you have Archer rolling his eyes at the end. So Archer is learning about Klingons.
Yeah, that last scene is just classic. It's so nice to see Archer learning. And for all of the criticism that Enterprise gets about how Archer doesn't know what he's doing and he's out there making all these mistakes, look at this. This is growth. This is growth in 13 episodes. You know, he started with a Klingon and now here he is knowing what to do and how to interact and how to make it better. And how fun is it that this is Vaughn Armstrong, who also plays Admiral Forrest. So these two must have just had an absolute ball filming this scene and getting to be so completely different and out of character from their usual interaction with each other.
Yeah, that's so cool that they got to do that. And I love seeing Vaughn Armstrong in whatever role he's playing. He's fantastic.
If you want to hear some more good Vaughn Armstrong moments, there is a Trek Ranks episode, our fellow podcast on Tricorder, all about Vaughn Armstrong and his best roles. So go look that up.
Oh, that's right. Great episode. Trek Ranks. Vaughn Armstrong.
So let's jump back to Hoshi and how she is in this episode, because I don't want to leave off how awesome it is to see her in action again.
Yes.
Like, she's reading, she's writing, she's deciphering, she is practicing her weaponry, she's, making bold choices. She is really showing growth as well. So for as much as Archer has learned about the Klingons, Hoshi's learned about space and about herself. And it's not so cliche as a lot of things that you would watch where, the little birdie is ready to leave the nest. No, she's just coming into her own and finding herself in this new role. We saw her as a teacher and she was eminently competent and professional and good at her job. And I think she is finally starting to believe and know that this is where she belongs and how she should be using her skills. And it's really neat to see that happen. I really appreciate all the times that we see exactly why it was so important to have a translator on Enterprise.
Yeah, I'm with you, Abby. I love seeing Hoshi step up in this episode. I mean, they kicked the episode off with her telling Archer that she has her space legs, and then that she's telling Depaul and Malcolm that she's not as claustrophobic in the suit. I mean, the episode is definitely trying to tell us this. But then we see her on this Klingon ship firing weapons, deciphering, like you were saying, making bold choices. She's the one coming up with these suggestions at the end, like, let's fire all 6 torpedoes. And her commanding officers are rolling with her suggestion. She's just coming alive here and showing again how multi-talented she is and how very intelligent she is. And I love seeing Hoshi step up. And I think that's another strength of this episode.
Yeah, and it is interesting because it ties into the galley scene that I know we want to spend a little bit of time on. Because the other part that I like about this is it shows us how competent she is, but they haven't just forgotten that she has this anxiety and these nerves, and that she is continually and consciously working on trying to manage them. And this was so much more than what she bargained for when she volunteered for this away mission. And yeah, if that was me, I probably would have needed a moment too. So it's nice to see that they didn't just, snap their fingers and make her a complete and total badass, because while she is, that part of her is one of the things that I find really appealing and that I empathize with, is that amount of anxiety and even self-doubt at times. So I'm glad that that scene was in there, besides the fact that the galley itself is incredible, which we can come back to. But seeing her with T'Pol and really working on getting that control back, that's really cool.
Abby, I'm really glad you brought that up. That is such a good point. I do like also that they're showing that it's not a snap of the fingers and she's a badass now. I love that, because we've talked about before, like on Fight or Flight, how you and I, and probably a lot of other people identify with Hoshi as the everyday person, Starfleet person who's happy to be there, but still there's some scary stuff there. There is anxiety, and we can relate to Hoshi. So I do like the way that they portrayed that within this episode. And that set design of that galley was so good that, yes, if I had seen all that stuff hanging there and the pot on the stove or wherever that pot was, and the targs in there, and how they made that scene was incredible. So I would have needed a moment like Hoshi too. And also nice to see that Depaul has empathy. Okay, she's a Vulcan. Maybe it's not empathy, but Depaul is caring for Hoshi in the moment and taking a moment out of this beat the clock situation to help Hoshi out. I very much appreciated that. When you think about how those two started off in Broken Bow and where they are now, that was a lovely moment and scene, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I don't know exactly how that meditation worked in there.
Mm-hmm.
If it was some sort of, Vulcan neural pressure, which I know we'll get to in a couple seasons, or if it was, she was doing something telepathically because they were touching, whatever it was, I need that trick. So, please, Star Trek, that could be based on science, not just fiction, because it would be so useful.
Absolutely. And the way that Hoshi said thank you to her was it was a very well acted scene. I mean, that whole ending act on the ship with Archer on the shuttle pod with Klingon and talking to them and the firing of the torpedoes, and that whole end of the episode, I thought was done really, really well. But there are a couple other things I forgot to mention within the episode, such as when they're putting the reinforcing braces on the shuttle pod.
Mm-hmm.
I loved seeing Archer and Trip getting their hands dirty, working right in there with the welding equipment and the welding masks.
Yep.
Their team is not doing it. They're doing it. First of all, I don't think we ever see this welding equipment again with these masks. I'm not sure. But that was kind of cool because it was kind of old school, right?
Yes.
So it tied into this is in the future, but not that far into the future. I liked that a lot. And I just liked seeing them get right in there and doing that work while having this good conversation. I enjoyed that.
I think it's one of the things that we see pretty consistently, at least at this part of the series, that when Archer and Trip have their really deep, meaningful conversations, they usually are doing something. They're fixing a relay, they're upgrading something, they're welding, they're even eating. Like they're never just sitting around and talking. Now, some of that I'm sure is directorial choice, and it's not so exciting to just watch two people have a conversation. That's more of a play than it is a TV show. And I love theater, but we know that's not the way it usually goes. But I also think it's a conscious choice by the writers to show that they are men of action. They don't sit still well.
Mm-hmm.
So even though they have a connection and they're ready to have this talk, they have to be having more than one thing to focus on in order to be able to really have that deep connection. And it's not until much later on that we see them actually just sit and talk without something else there to kind of occupy them at the same time.
Right. And, speaking of Trip, I do have mixed feelings about one part of the episode, which is when Trip is joking around with Archer about, if they sense, if the Klingons sense weakness, they'll try to kill you and take command. Or there are a few different instances during the episode where Trip is kind of smiling and smirking and joking around with Archer. And while I enjoy that because I love Trip and Connor Trinneer is such a great actor, and part of it did make me smile. At the same time, their three crew members are in a life or death situation, and it just didn't feel jokey to me. It felt a little bit out of place, and I know this is a little nitpicky. That's the only thing in the episode that kind of made me go, I still enjoyed it because I love watching Connor, and it was kind of funny. But other than that, very, very well done episode.
Well, if we're talking about confusing Trip moments, I had one myself this episode. And it kind of ties into having Hoshi be indispensable on the ship, because when Trip is trying to tie in the universal translator on the bridge, he looks pretty baffled, and he even says, well, I'll try to tie in the UT. Isn't he the chief engineer? I'm pretty sure like he'd know how to do that, unless Hoshi has some sort of like magic translate button that only she can work, or it's, set to her fingerprint or something. But that surprised me. I was like, hey, wait a minute, shouldn't that be pretty okay? So again, we're just gonna let it go because it's totally not a big deal, but I don't think I'll ever not notice that again.
That is so funny, Abby. He does make that little face there. And remember, he did say he's never met a busted radio he can't fix. He's a pretty techie guy. I do think it would be wise, and maybe this has already happened, but if Hoshi can train everybody on the bridge how to do that, that will really come in handy. Overall, I really like how Archer just takes command in this episode, as he always does. When he realizes the shuttle pod can't go down there, he's like, well, then we'll just take the ship down. Like, I just like the way he thinks and problem solves. And the whole crew problem solved really well together on this one. Do you have any other final thoughts?
One last little fun thing to end this on a high note. This is the second time Travis gets to sit in the big chair, and it just made me smile.
Oh, yeah. When Archer said, you have the bridge, Travis. And he said, yes, sir. That was cool. Well, now it's time for our Porthos pick, which is our favorite part of the episode. Abby, what's your favorite part?
Okay, so this absolutely shocked me after I watched this a couple times that this was what was standing out the most for me in the entire episode. Because if you had told me that I would ever have a decon scene as my Porthos pick, I would have laughed right in your face. But I have to say that this scene, when the first time I rewatched this, I didn't remember that it even existed. It was like watching a brand new scene for me. And I enjoyed the fact that they were already in their shiny goo. We didn't have to watch anybody rub on anybody. They're sitting there, and the camaraderie is so delightful between the three of them. All three of these people, who are never really ones to be described as relaxed, were there relaxing together. And even though it was like the lowest of 2000s TV lows where they're shiny and abs and underwear and all that, it's just such a nice scene to see them. They've come together. They've had this bonding experience. The nonverbals, it's just nice. And it just leaves the episode with a feeling that I found really just kind of changed the whole tone. That like they came through all this, and then there was just this really nice character moment where you look back and go, yeah, the three of them together is good. Now, I did notice that there's one little audio flub, at least I watched it on Paramount Plus, it's on that one, where there's a little sound effect that's dubbed every time the combat panel is pressed. But when Depaul presses the button to respond the first time, it beeps. But then when she turns it off to end the conversation, it's not there. The beep is gone. So just a funny little thing, but it didn't take away from the fact that I just really was thinking about the three of them. This almost feels naughty. They're not following protocol. They're kind of breaking the rules, but it's not really a big deal, and nice to see them bonding. I really enjoyed a decon scene. There you go. It's out there in public.
All right. That is a really nice pick, Abby. I agree. There is something very endearing about this scene, and seeing the three of them together in cahoots.
Yeah.
With let's try to stay in here a little longer. That was super heartwarming. So I agree with you. That's a wonderful pick. I will say, though, that the NX-01 needs a longer bench in decon. I mean, it was very convenient to have the three of them huddled together for that shot, but they need a bigger bench there on some different walls. That was super cool. Great pick, Abby. Love it.
Thanks. How about you? What's your pick?
My pick is is that scene in the mess hall with Depaul and Hoshi. I just love that scene, the way it's written, the way it's acted, the lighting, the set, the relationship between Depaul and Hoshi. And like you, I would like to learn more about this technique. And I have to tell you what Depaul described about the ocean, and you're on a boat on the ocean and you're in control. I actually tried it just to see what Hoshi was feeling. And it's really super cool. So like you, I would like to have a Vulcan seminar on anxiety control. I think there needs to be some lessons here from Depaul, and I'm all for it. And once again, how fantastic was that set? So that's my favorite part.
Yeah, I wish that there had been a way that we could have seen that set with the full lighting on, like nice and bright, like before they actually were filming. I'm betting that there are so many details we can't even see because the amount of details we can see are just astounding. That's one of the best sets so far this season. And nice to see them use it, not just in the way of they're bumping around and exploring all these strange Klingon things, but they actually sat in it. They were in the scene to have that moment of calming. Mm-hmm. And I just really like that that's the set that they used.
Accessing library computer data.
Okay, it's time for the sharing of some trivia. Abby, what can you tell us about sleeping dogs?
Well, something that I found out that was so interesting to me is that the siren sounds that were made by the EM waves coming from the gas giant are the same sounds made by the alien probe in Star Trek IV Voyage Home, just stretched out and slowed down a tiny bit. But once you hear it, you'll never unhear it.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. It's the same exact sound effect?
Yep, same exact sound effect. 25% slower.
I have to go back and listen to that. That is so cool. I love that sound effect in Star Trek IV.
Yeah, and I like it when they reuse things like that. I think it's a nice little homage to the past, which is in this setting, actually the future.
Very, very cool.
What about you, Melanie? What did you find out?
I learned that this was the first totally computer-generated targ used in Star Trek. So apparently before this, they must have used, puppets or models. But this is the first time we have a full CG targ, or targs, shall we say, for this one. And I thought that was really interesting. I didn't know that.
That is super interesting. And it kind of makes me want to go back and look at all the other targs and figure out how they did it.
Yes.
Transfer of data is complete.
Well, now we've arrived at our Vulcan's verdict. On a scale of 1 to 10 grapplers, Abby, how do you rate this episode?
Well, I really enjoyed the part of this episode where we see the new trio, Malcolm, Hoshi, and Depaul, that we talked about. And I liked the Klingon culture moments. But I just found overall this one doesn't pop with me all the way that some of the other episodes in this season do. And like I said, before I went back and rewatched for this, I had forgotten entire scenes of it. So this one is good. It's solid. I have developed a deeper appreciation, but I'm giving it 7 grapplers.
All right. Yeah, I feel that it's solid as well. This is one from season 1 that I've always really enjoyed. It was nice to rewatch it again. I like the trio of Hoshi, Malcolm, and Depaul. I enjoyed exploring more Klingon lore and also seeing Archer's growth and development and everybody coming together to problem solve. So I ended up giving this one 7.5 grapplers, 7.5 grapplers.
My chronometer's running backwards, sir.
Incoming transmission.
You read my letter?
Okay, Daniel's going to be sending us back in the timeline now to hear some of your thoughts and your picks. Abby, what do you have for us tonight?
Well, I have a comment that comes from our friend Ross, otherwise known as Taborg, T-E-H, Borg, at Star Trek 1701 with all the vowels out on Twitter. And this was about Silent Enemy, which I have to say, I personally was absolutely astounded by the amount of people who wanted to talk a lot about this episode. It was so cool. So thank you to everybody that wrote in. I didn't realize that so many people had such strong feelings about this one. But back to Ross. He said, I love that this episode keeps with the theme of space exploration as mysterious and bizarre and not necessarily explainable in ways that we can comprehend. Other species might be as alien in thought as they are in form. Cool ideas, cool concept, and yeah, one of the best parts about this episode for me. So thank you, Ross, for that comment. Keep them coming, guys. We love reading them.
And if you would like to continue this discussion with us or share your Porthos picks or Grappler ratings, you can reach us at FirstFlight Pod on Twitter and Instagram. Abby, what's the best way to reach you?
Best way to find me is on Twitter, and I'm Abby M. Sommer. That's SOMMER.
And you can contact me on Twitter at ShuttlePod2, ShuttlePodTWO. We want to thank you for spending this time with us, and we'll be back next time with Shadows of Pajem, the 14th episode of Season 1. And as always, we leave you with this quote from Captain Jonathan Archer. The most profound discoveries are not necessarily beyond that next star. They're within us, woven into the threads that bind us, all of us, to each other.